The Misadventures of Benny the Talking Parrot. Benny wasn't an ordinary parrot. He was a parrot with an attitude. Unlike the other birds at Mrs. Jenkins' pet shop, Benny had a special gift. He could talk. Not just mimic words, but actually hold conversations. Well, sort of. Most people found this fascinating, except for Mrs. Jenkins, who often regretted ever teaching him to speak. One day, a man named Mr. Thompson entered the shop, looking for a new pet. He had recently retired and thought a bird would be the perfect companion. Something quiet, easy to care for, he said. Mrs. Jenkins hesitated before glancing at Benny, who was innocently preening his feathers. Well, I do have this wonderful, very friendly parrot. Before she could finish, Benny blurted out, "Run while you can, buddy." Mr. Thompson blinked. "Excuse me?" Mrs. Jenkins laughed nervously. "Oh, Benny just has a sense of humor." Benny flapped his wings. "Yeah, sure. Let's call it that." Despite the warning, Mr. Thompson was intrigued. "I'll take him," he said. As soon as they got home, Benny made himself comfortable. "Nice place," he commented, pecking at the curtains. "Bit dusty, though. Ever heard of cleaning?" Mr. Thompson sighed. "This is going to be interesting." Benny's new home life with Benny was far from dull. Every morning, Mr. Thompson was woken up by Benny shouting, "Get up, lazy bones, the worms are getting away." Breakfast was a challenge. Benny had a habit of perching on Mr. Thompson's shoulder and making commentary about his food. "Cereal again? No wonder you're still single." Whenever Mr. Thompson had guests over, Benny turned into a stand-up comedian. "Hey, did you hear about the guy who adopted a parrot? Poor fool never knew what hit him." One afternoon, Mr. Thompson invited his neighbor Mrs. Perkins for tea. She was a lovely elderly woman who adored animals, but as soon as she sat down, Benny sized her up. "Whoa, fancy hat. Are we going to a royal wedding or just covering up a bad haircut?" Mrs. Perkins gasped. "Well, I never." Benny fluffed his feathers. "Well, now you have." After that, word spread around the neighborhood. Mr. Thompson became known as the man with the sassy parrot, Benny's big adventure. One day, Benny decided he had spent enough time indoors. He wanted freedom. So, while Mr. Thompson was taking a nap, Benny managed to push open his cage door and flutter to the window. "Time to see the world!" he squawked, and with one dramatic leap, soared out into the neighborhood. At first, it was thrilling. He perched on lampposts, scared a few pigeons, and even dive-bombed a cat for fun. But soon, Benny realized he had no idea how to get home. "Oh, great," he muttered. "I'm a genius." He landed in the middle of a park, where a group of children immediately surrounded him. "Look, a talking parrot," one boy shouted. Benny puffed out his chest. "That's right, kid, and for my next trick, I'll—" Before he could finish, a little girl tried to grab him. Panicked, Benny flapped his wings and took off, barely escaping tiny, sticky hands. "Too much attention! Too much attention!" he yelled as he flew off. His next stop was a cafe, where he landed right in the middle of someone's cappuccino. "Hey, buddy, ever heard of personal space?" Benny snapped, shaking off foam. The customer, covered in coffee, just stared in shock as Benny made a quick escape. After several more misadventures, including a brief stint inside a grocery store where he yelled, "Prices are robbery," Benny finally found a familiar sight, Mr. Thompson's garden gnome. "Home, sweet home!" he cheered and swooped down onto the windowsill. Mr. Thompson, who had spent hours searching, nearly dropped his cup of tea. "Benny, where have you been?" Benny gave him a dramatic look. "Oh, you know, just living my best life." With a deep sigh, Mr. Thompson put Benny back in his cage. "No more escaping, okay?" Benny smirked. "No promises." Happily ever after, sort of. Despite the chaos, Mr. Thompson grew fond of Benny's company. Sure, he was loud, sarcastic, and impossible to control, but life was never boring with him around. And so, Benny continued his reign as the world's sassiest parrot, making sure that Mr. Thompson and the entire neighborhood never had a quiet moment again.